Welcome to our Institute of Nuclear Materials Management webinar on the future of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I'm Mark Shanfine, President of the Institute. This and other webinars are part of the INMM mission to provide timely and relevant webinars. The Institute is dedicated to the safe, secure, and effective stewardship of nuclear and other radioactive materials and related technologies through the advancement of scientific knowledge, technical skills, policy dialogue, professional capabilities, and best practices. Supporting this mission are our 6 technical divisions, each covering a major dimension of the overall nuclear and other radioactive materials management domain, including facility operations, international safeguards, materials control and accountability, non-proliferation and arms control, nuclear security and physical protection, packaging, transportation, and disposition. We have over 1,000 members from around the world and value our partnerships with the IEA, Women in Nuclear Global, ISARDA, ABAC, WINS, NTI, and encourage those of you who are not members to consider joining our institute. Our recent introduction of tiered regional pricing helps address financial barriers to membership. The call for abstracts for our upcoming annual meeting in Portland, Oregon, scheduled for July 21st through the 25th, has just been released and can be accessed at inmm.org under events. We hope you will join us there and share your work and benefit from the expansive program and networking opportunities. I want to thank our distinguished guests you will be hearing from today, and to thank Susan Pepper for organizing this event. We hope you enjoyed this discussion and our future events. I now turn it over to our co-moderators, Susan Pepper, INMM past president, and Alicia Swift, Nonproliferation and Arms Control Technical Division Chair.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Susan Pepper, immediate past president of the INMM, and I and my colleague Alicia Swift are really happy to be co-moderating this session. We have 4 distinguished panelists who will be presenting their views today. We have Robert Floyd from the CTBTO, Kasia Mendelson from the National Nuclear Security Administration, Sharon Squassoni from George Washington University, and Jean Dupree from the Middlebury Institute for International Studies at Monterey. We will be introducing them one by one. They'll be making short comments, and then their comments will be followed by questions and answers from the moderators and from the audience. Audience members are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A section, and Alicia and I will compile them for distribution to the panelists. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Floyd, who began his tenure as the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization on August 1st, 2021. He's the 4th Executive Secretary of the organization. Prior to joining the CTBTO, Dr. Floyd was the Director General of the Australian Safeguards and Nonproliferation Office from 2020 to 2021. He was responsible for Australia's implementation of and compliance with various international treaties and conventions, including the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, and the Chemical Weapons Convention. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Floyd.
Thank you so much, Susan, and good afternoon, as it is in Vienna, but probably good morning, or sorry to wake you up so early if you're on the west coast of the US. To me, it's a great pleasure to be able to address the INMM members twice in 1 year. Once back in May at the joint annual meeting with ISARDA here in Vienna, but then this time on a more specific topic. And it always gives me lots of wonderful memories as I think about INMM meetings in the past that I've been to. Can I just say, though, to INMM members, I know you're a mixture. Some of you are with government, some of you are from national labs, some are fully independent. But it really is important for people with expertise, with some level of independence, to be aware of some of the critical issues that are worked through in diplomacy and international security. And your informing debate is really important. So thank you so much again, Susan, and INMM for organising this event and making this possible. I've been given 10 minutes to give you a short context from my perspective as Executive Secretary of the CTBTO. I have a very simple message. The message is that the entry into force of the CTBT has never been more important than it is today. And I want to now explain why I say that. Certainly, as we start and look around the geopolitical landscape, we see there are, and this is particularly pertaining to non-proliferation disarmament, there are many pressures coming to bear. There are many dark clouds which are threatening the non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. A dark cloud where many states have got increased anxiety that other states will actually use nuclear weapon. I mean, use. Anxiety that a state might test again anytime. Anxiety that a state is accumulating large amounts of highly enriched uranium for purpose that is difficult to understand. All of that, together, I think there is a heightened public awareness around issues to do with nuclear weapons, and the recent Oppenheimer movie has certainly been an important contribution to raising that debate and that awareness. So, as we zoom in a little for the CTBT, the Russian Federation's de-ratification of the CTBT was certainly very disappointing, was certainly deeply regrettable. But it's probably broadly a symptom of the rather unstable geopolitical landscape that we're now in. The CTBT is not the only part of the non-proliferation disarmament landscape that has actually been impacted in such a way, as we see a lack of consensus for NPT review conferences, the Russian Federation suspending its involvement with New START, Russian Federation withdrawing from the CFE treaty, just to name a few. So it's not all about the CTBT, but more symptomatic of this time. Yet, in all of that, I would say that the CTBT remains a bright spot and also continues to present a viable pathway to move forward on non-proliferation and disarmament. Even the Russian Federation still thinks this, but more on their thinking in a moment. So why do I say it's a bright spot after all the gloomy messages I've just shared with you? Well, I say it's a bright spot because the CTBT is already successful in so many ways. Near universal support of the CTBT. Almost all countries in the world support the object and purpose of this treaty. 187 have actually signed it. That's only 9 states that have not signed the treaty. 177 have ratified it. These are big numbers, and the numbers continue to grow, even in spite of one country choosing to de-ratify. But the success of the treaty is more than that. It's about a powerful norm against nuclear testing that exists. The moratorium commitments that states have made to not test is really powerful, and it's holding by and large. But why? Firstly, just think about how powerful this is that before the opening for signature of the CTBT, over 2,000 nuclear tests were conducted. But from that date forward, then there's been less than a dozen. That's powerful success, but why? Well, that's where I think the CTBT has a major contribution, because the international monitoring system and the international data center is already working. We have over 90% of the stations, 305 stations, are certified and up and running. We have the 4 technologies picking up seismic vibrations and sounds in the ocean, in the atmosphere, as well as radioactive material in the atmosphere that are working and sending data from all around the world into Vienna and then back out from Vienna to all of the state signatories so that they can then analyze and work with that data independently. It's working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's detected every one of the North Korean tests, even the very small first one. So this is a story of success, which then supports states that have made these strong commitments, these moratorium commitments to not test because they want to know that no one else is testing. The momentum towards universalization, also is huge. 8 states ratifying the CTBT in the last 2 years. Now, ratifying, but I already told you 177 have ratified the treaty. That's amazing to have 8 new ones in the last 2 years when the numbers are already so high. There is a surge of interest, and that interest is there because of the anxieties that I mentioned earlier, that states are seeing that we as a planet, we need this treaty, and we need it ultimately to enter into force. I visited China just a few weeks ago, and it was good to meet with their technical people as well as their political level and to hear their commitment to the treaty. And I think we're going to see more on that over the next 12 months, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with them on that front. So what I'm saying here is that we might have one state that has chosen to de-ratify, but we must put it into a broader context. And as we look at the tide of states, that flow of states moving towards this treaty, one state de-ratifying should not be overemphasized, regrettable as it is. But let me just add a little bit to what the Russian Federation says to me when I talk to them, and I've talked to them quite a few times in recent weeks. There are actually 4 points that the Russian Federation continues to reiterate to me. And it's important, I think, for us all to know what they're saying. They're saying that revoking its ratification of the CTBT is not withdrawing from the treaty. They are not unsigning. So that's the first thing that they're saying. Secondly, they're saying that their moratorium commitment against testing remains, as long as the US doesn't test first. The third commitment that they keep reiterating to me is that they wish to complete the establishment of all of their international monitoring system stations, that's all 32, by the end of this year. They've got one to go. There are 31 that are up and certified, and I think it's quite likely, plus or minus a week, that they will achieve that, and we will have the 32nd one certified before the year is out. And then the fourth commitment that they keep making to me is to continue sharing data from their IMS stations with the International Data Center and with the states of the world. These are some of the obligations and of state signatories, of which the Russian Federation remains one of those. I keep sharing what they are saying to me because then we can all see how they perform on those 4 things and hold them accountable. But let me finish on a slightly different note. In the last few months, we have heard and read a number of reports and papers about concerns of activities being conducted at test or former test sites around the world, in the Russian Federation, in China, in the United States of America. A focus of additional activity or concerns about what was that blip? And I've got to say to you that it's very, very important that we continue to build the confidence that states have, that all states are complying by their commitments and their moratorium commitments around not testing. But this is where we come back to entry into force. Because to settle concerns that states may have about some of these heightened activities, we need entry into force, and so that all 4 of the verification elements of the CTBT can be used. It's not enough to have the international monitoring system because very low yield tests can't easily be detected by the international monitoring system. But we need confidence building measures. These are prescribed in the treaty and the associated documents, information that would be shared by states with other states, that they can have confidence in what they're doing is all appropriate under the treaty. We need the consultation and clarification mechanisms. That's where a state has a concern about what was that explosion that took place. And the consultation and clarification mechanisms are there so that a state can say, look, here we go. Here is the data. Here is the information. You can see that it is what I told you it was. And ultimately, we need on-site inspection. You know, the ultimate test that if states are still not convinced by another state's clarification, then on-site inspection can ultimately see what really took place. But without entry into force, the reputation of states cannot be protected, and the questions remain. That is why, at this point in time, it's incredibly important that we see entry into force of this treaty so that all states can benefit from all elements of the verification regime, which is absolutely in their interest. So I might just leave it there. This is our treaty. It's not just my treaty. I might head up an organization with a wonderful mission, but it's actually your treaty as well. And that we all need to be working together to reduce the risks to this treaty, whether it's through a return to testing by states or a lack of confidence in the commitment that states have made, that what we could do together individually, nationally, really matters for all of humanity. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to listening to the other speakers and then engaging in question and answer time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Floyd. It was really great to hear from you and all of your thoughts. And I'm sure we'll get into some questions in the Q&A. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. I'm Alicia Swift. I'm the co-moderator with Susan Pepper today, and it's my honor to introduce Kasia Mendelson, our next distinguished panelist. So Kasia is Principal Assistant Deputy Administrator for the Office of Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation, or DNN, at the U.S. Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA. Ms. Mendelson previously served in the Acting Deputy Administrator and Policy Director roles for DNN, and as the Assistant Deputy Administrator for Nonproliferation and Arms Control. Much of her career has focused on addressing urgent national security issues, including countering the growth of plutonium and highly enriched uranium stockpiles, strengthening multilateral nonproliferation treaties and agreements, and enhancing international nuclear safeguards and security of nuclear materials and facilities worldwide. Welcome, Kasia.
Thank you so much. And as you said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A special thank you to INMM. A lot of my comments are going to echo what Rob Floyd just said. I think we're in violent agreement, but particularly in terms of praise for INMM in making sure that we have the forum and the opportunity to discuss these important issues. And a special thank you to you, Alicia, and Susan Pepper for moderating today. So as most of you know, the Biden administration laid out in the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review that the United States, and I'm quoting here, supports the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and is committed to working to achieve its entry into force, recognizing the significant challenges to achieving that goal. President Biden has been a longtime supporter of the CTBT for its national security and arms control benefits, and in particular in the areas of transparency, predictability, and stability. Frankly, with the current geopolitical security environment that Mr. Floyd already pointed out, which includes countries that are making advancements in their nuclear weapons programs, and some are even threatening to use or test these weapons, maintaining the international norm against nuclear explosive testing should be in the interest of all countries, and it's more important than ever. So while the Biden administration recognizes that there isn't yet sufficient support in the US Congress to ratify the CTBT, we continue to show our strong and enduring support for the treaty through a variety of efforts. Some of you may have had the good fortune of hearing the remarks made by NNSA Administrator Jill Ruby and Deputy Administrator Corey Hinderstein last year at actually this past summer at the CTBT Science and Technology Conference in Vienna in June. But I think it's worth repeating here. So first, the United States continues to observe a moratorium on nuclear explosive testing, and we call on all states who possess nuclear weapons to declare or maintain a similar moratorium. The United States has not conducted a nuclear explosive test since 1992, and we have no plans to do so. Second, while the current security environment requires us to maintain a safe, secure, and reliable and effective nuclear stockpile for our security and that of our allies and partners, we are committed to maintaining the U.S. nuclear stockpile without nuclear explosive testing. And we do this through NNSA's Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program, or SSP. We have made an enormous investment in the SSP, particularly in the areas of high-performance computing and a variety of CTBT consistent experiments. Every year, the SSP activities culminate with an annual joint letter from our Secretaries of Energy and Defense to our President, reporting on the safety, the reliability, the performance, and the military effectiveness of the stockpile, as well as whether nuclear explosive testing is necessary to resolve any issues identified. And to date, and this has been now decades, all annual assessments have reported that there is no need for nuclear explosive testing to maintain the stockpile. In addition to the SSP, the 2,000 plus tests that Mr. Floyd mentioned before, so our nuclear explosive test history and the significant reduction in quantity, down from 88% from its peak, as well as the types of weapons in the U.S. nuclear weapon stockpile, have made it possible to maintain our test moratorium. So for those of you who are really interested in the nuts and bolts of the stockpile, I encourage you to read the recently released FY24 Stockpile Stewardship and Management Plan. It's filled with details on how we maintain the stockpile without the need for nuclear explosive testing, while also revitalizing the nuclear security enterprise. Third, the U.S. government supports the CTBT through the extensive support that we provide to the CTBTO Preparatory Committee, and these are just a few of the highlights. We are the largest contributor to the CTBTO PrepCom among the signatory states. We also fund the operation, maintenance, and recapitalization of 36 U.S. IMS stations. In addition, through NNSA and the Departments of State and Defense, we fund U.S. experts to assist the Provisional Technical Secretariat at the CTBTO and advance state-of-the-art in nuclear explosion monitoring and verification. So all told, this is more than $50 million in contributions per year that directly benefit this international effort. We also lead a number of projects that directly enhance international nuclear explosion monitoring and verification, including the new Xenon International Radio Xenon Collection and Analysis System that was recently accepted for use in the IMS. We're sponsoring a workshop next week in Chile. We're co-sponsoring it with Chile to bring together, this is the WASMIP for those of you who track this, to bring together nuclear explosion monitoring experts and medical isotope producers to better understand and mitigate effects of radioxenon emissions on the highly sensitive IMS. And we also work to provide stack monitors to medical isotope producers to better understand those emissions. The IDC is in the middle of a very large reengineering program. The U.S. Air Force Technical Application Center, or AFTAC, is using upgrades to the U.S. National Data Center and sharing them with the IDC. We're also host to, through our Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, we host one of the 16 radionuclide laboratories that accept particulate and gas samples of high interest from IMS stations for detailed analysis. So these are just a few of the U.S. projects supporting the CTBTO PrepCom. Again, I refer you to the Deputy Administrator Hinderstein's remarks from S&T 23 for a more comprehensive list. So fourth and finally, as any responsible nuclear power should, the United States is committed to transparency in our programs related to stockpile stewardship, subcritical experiments, and nonproliferation. And we've maintained this commitment for decades. We were very pleased to host Dr. Floyd and his colleagues at our NNSA headquarters back in September of 2021. We also went to Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in 2022, and then out to Los Alamos, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Nevada National Security Site just this past April. And just starting today, actually, we are hosting a dozen senior representatives of non-governmental organizations in Nevada to show them the transformation of the former Nevada test site into what is now a home for world-class non-proliferation experimentation, training, and projects. We have other ways that we're providing transparency into our program, including sending event notifications of our chemical high explosive tests to regional seismic networks, as well as the CTBTO PrepCom through our US mission in Vienna. We are publicly sharing the data gathered from our high explosive events when they occur, and we continue to publish and present geophysical experiment findings in peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings, including source term and collection information. We are exploring ideas within our interagency that would allow us to provide further transparency into our program. These ideas are meant for bilateral or multilateral cooperation, and we are always eager to work with those who share our goal of greater transparency. We remain hopeful and continue to strive for the time when we'll be in a position to re-engage in arms control talks with Russia and with China. And should that time come, as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has indicated, we are open to engaging with Russia and China on verification-focused confidence-building measures and other technological interactions that would support future arms control and non-proliferation agreements as appropriate. We are discussing other reciprocal measures, including possible reciprocal visits to the DOE nuclear security enterprise, but let me be clear, no visits have taken place. There are no visits or invitations planned, and we're not yet in a place where we see an invitation to Russia's or China's nuclear security enterprises being offered to us. But we will continue to work with the national laboratories, our NGO partners, to explore and find innovative ways to bridge the gaps. And we're going to continue to make investments in arms control and verification, including through our Arms Control Advancement Initiative. So in closing, just to reiterate, the United States has a deep commitment to non-proliferation and disarmament goals of both the NPT and the CTBT. In addition to supporting the core tenets of the CTBT by maintaining the US stockpile as long as it exists without nuclear explosive testing, we are also extremely transparent about our ongoing and planned activities. I think our actions speak for themselves. We provide unprecedented insight into our work and welcome the international community to see how we do business, and it's our desire that other nuclear powers will follow our lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasia. Very interesting. I've always noticed that despite not having ratified the treaty, the United States supports it financially and in many other ways. So thanks for telling us all about that. Our next speaker will be Jean Dupree. Jean directs the Education and Training Program at the Center for Nonproliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. In this role, he manages the CNS International Visiting Fellows Program and various other nonproliferation education and outreach activities, including regional short courses for diplomats and women in STEM and internships at international nonproliferation organizations. His research interests include the NPT, the legacy of nuclear testing, and the future of the CTBT, future fissile material cutoff treaty, the role of the non-aligned movement, and the role of multilateral organizations in nonproliferation, arms control, and disarmament. He's also a member of the International Panel of Fissile Material. Jean, thank you for joining us today. You're muted.
Apologies for that. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for INMM for inviting me to this very important and timely panel. In addition to Susan's most kind introduction, I have to also say that I'm a very proud former staff member of the CTBTO, having served there for almost 8 years. I'm going to take a slightly different tack than what the Executive Secretary and Kasia spoke about, and I fully appreciate and respect the fact that as the Executive Secretary and as the representative of the US government, they have to put these developments in a certain context. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more provocative especially for purposes of stirring up the pot for the discussion. Russia's decision to remove its ratification is arguably one of the biggest challenges facing the future of the treaty. But the treaty has had a rocky start from the very beginning. It came out of the CD without consensus. It faced a number of subsequent challenges, including the US Senate's vote in '99 not to give its advice and consent. The US nuclear establishment for long questioned the verification capacity of the IMS. The George Bush administration defunded the PrepCom in the mid-2000s, and entry into force continues to be a far distant dream, with the remaining Annex II states holding the treaty hostage. Yet, as Dr. Floyd very, very eloquently described, the treaty is not fully enforced, but it is already remarkably successful. It represents a recognized global norm against nuclear explosive testing, with only North Korea violating this ban. It is one of the most adhered multilateral treaties, and the IMS is almost fully completed and has been tried and tested several times. I have to say that the work of the CTBT under the leadership of Dr. Floyd and his predecessors, and with a dedicated group of scientists, engineers, and other staff, has been remarkable, especially given the technical, financial, and political challenge facing the treaty at the time. And as a former staff member, I can attest to the fact that there is nothing preparatory about the PrepCom. It's a fully functioning international organization, recognized under international law a lot. Coming back to Moscow's decision to rescind its ratification, this is deeply alarming, especially given the context of its illegal war against Ukraine and following several irresponsible nuclear rhetoric and threats. But let's not forget that George W. Bush announced shortly after taking office that his administration would not support the treaty, and that they would ask the Senate to reconsider the CTBT. John Bolton sought a legal analysis on whether the president can actually withdraw from the treaty, withdraw its signature from the treaty. And while the State Department's legal opinion indicated that only the Senate has the authority to discharge the treaty from its executive calendar, the Bush administration stated that it may wish to someday resume explosive testing. The administration also cut funding for the INS, suspended its contributions for further developing of the OSI, and even voted against the General Assembly CTBT resolution, the only state to do so. It's also worth noting that, of course, the Bush administration withdrew from the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty, which prompted Russia to declare that it would not abide by the START treaty. I want to just pause for a moment to reflect on the legal implications here. And I think there are two legal instruments that we need to look at. First, the treaty itself. Articles 9 of the treaty requires a state to give 6 months' notice to all parties should it wish to withdraw, and as well as to the Secretary, the UN Secretary General, and the Security Council. However, since the treaty is not enforced, I would argue that this article does not apply. However, a CTBT ratifying state that chooses to withdraw from the treaty prior to entry into force could potentially first revoke its ratification, and depending on its constitutional provisions, then withdraw its signature. More applicable would be Article 18 of the Vienna Convention Law of Treaties. That stipulates that a signatory to a treaty shall not defeat the objective and purpose of the treaty prior to its entry into force. It's worth pointing out that Russia is a party to the present Vienna Convention, and the US is not, although successive US administrations have abided by it. Deputy Foreign Minister Rybkov's statement that Moscow's decisions to rescind its ratification is to achieve parity with the treaty status of the US is interesting. And he also, as the Executive Secretary mentioned earlier, that Moscow would continue to respect the treaty as a signatory, support the IMS, including its 32 stations on the Russian territory. I'm, however, not convinced that seeking parity with the US is Moscow's end goal. Its decision to revoke its ratification is a clear statement not to be bound by the CTBT, whether or not there is a specific procedure under international law for revoking a ratification or not. Russia walked away from all remaining nuclear arms control treaties. And this suggests that the Kremlin might no longer be following the global nuclear order that prevailed in the end of the Cold War. Also, against this backdrop, we should consider Russia's development of new types of weapons and delivery systems, including the hypersonic glide re-entry vehicle. The hard question, I believe, that should be asked is, does Moscow's renunciation of its ratification instrument represent a step towards unilaterally removing its signature, thereby paving the way for a possible Russian nuclear explosion demonstration? Such a demonstration would obviously defeat the objective or purpose of the CTBT, but a non-signatory Russia could argue that legal ramification under the CTBT would no longer apply. Of course, it's also concerning that Russia could justify its long suspected very low nuclear experiments as non-nuclear tests. As we know, the Security Council has proven to be dysfunctional, especially in the case of a P5 dilator, and it's highly unlikely that any consequences will flow from the Security Council in response to a possible Russian demonstration. My greatest fear is not that Russia withdraw from the CTBT or even demonstrates an explosion, but the consequences of such explosive tests, I think, would be devastating. And I think here I would like to refer to what I would like to call the negative dominoes effect. Firstly, we can recall that when India tested in '98, it's commonly considered that its thermonuclear aspirations were not successful. And New Delhi must be watching this very closely. Given the recent Biden-Marty meeting, at which further collaboration between the US and India in the civil nuclear cooperation was discussed, I think is worth considering Ashley Tellis's remarks just yesterday, that the Biden administration must revisit its own policy towards India's nuclear program. The current US approach is increasingly becoming an impediment to bilateral cooperation that aims to strengthen Indian capability and preserve a favorable balance of power in Asia. Since Tellis may very well be have a prominent role in a second Trump presidency, I think this is worth considering. Of course, Pakistan's nuclear posture is pegged to India's, and the likelihood of Pakistan testing if India does is high. Further, it's no secret that China is rapidly expanding its nuclear weapons and triad capacity, and I would argue that resumed testing by India would provide sufficient motivation for China to do the same. I appreciate the fact that the US leadership pronounced on several occasions, just as Kasia stated a few minutes ago, that the US does not need to test or has no intention of resuming explosive testing. However, given the 22 billion plus nuclear weapons stockpile overall, and a number of other developments, including the new W-93 submarine launch warhead, I wonder, and again I'm being provocative, whether someone at some certain point may ask, is there a cheaper way to do this than the stockpile stewardship program? And suggest that let's just blow one up. That point, I believe, may get uncomfortably close under the Trump administration. Let me just wrap up, and I know I'm running over time, that this scenario should be avoided at all costs. As a first step, Putin should be provided with sufficient credible de-escalating off-ramps to avoid more bad and dangerous choices. Isolating the state, especially one armed with nuclear weapons, can have negative consequences. The US should also, in its renewed collaboration with India, insist on conditional assurances that India will not resume testing and that New Delhi would work towards eventually signing the CTBT. Maintenance of both the US and Chinese test moratoria should be the highest priority for the US leadership in a strategic relationship with China, even in the face of a possible Russian demonstration. And finally, the US should work with its partners, including even adversaries in the G77, to ensure that the CTBTO has the fullest possible support and means to complete and maintain the INMM. Perhaps the silver lining on the otherwise dark cloud could be that this is a wake-up call to all CTBT signatories and ratifying states. And here I want to echo Dr. Floyd's comments earlier. After 28 years, we cannot be sleepwalking anymore and pretend that the future of the CTBT is alive and well. It is not. This treaty represents the pinnacle of multilateral and arms control non-proliferation verification. It's the last treaty of its kind. And I think states and NGO pundits who believe that the TPNW is a better alternative are not seeing the looming thunderheads rolling in. I'll stop there, and I look forward to the question also.
Thank you, Jean. Let's see, I had to find the unmute button amidst all the the chat boxes. Give me 1 second. Okay, great. So our final panelist is Sharon Squassoni. We are so excited to have her today as well. Sharon is a research professor at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Studies. Her research, writing, and policymaking has focused on reducing risks from nuclear energy and weapons for 3 decades. And she has held a number of senior positions at the State Department, the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, and the Congressional Research Service, as well as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She is also on the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the PIR Center, the Wisconsin Project, and the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. And she is the co-founder of the Climate Security Initiative. So we are very glad to have you today. Take it away, Sharon.
Thank you, Alicia. It's a pleasure to be here, thanks to INMM. Although I guess the thing that brought us here together is not so terrific. Anyway, I sought to look at, are the implications of Russia's de-ratification serious or not? And I actually find compelling arguments on both sides. And I'm going to try and move quickly through these because some of these arguments have already been made. So first, the argument that, no, it's not very serious. For several reasons. From a practical perspective, there may be no change. As Rob Floyd has mentioned, the 4 commitments that Russia has made indicate that we may not see a lot of changes. I don't know whether there will be budgetary implications eventually from that. From a legal perspective, I'd follow on from what Jean said. Yeah, there's also not a big change, right? Revoking ratification isn't a thing, right? Russia has not withdrawn from the treaty. When you look at the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, it does mention suspension, but it also indicates that you need to follow the procedures in a treaty. And obviously the CTBT allows for withdrawal in Article 9. But it has that standard language, right? If a country decides that extraordinary events related to the subject of the matter of the treaty have jeopardized its supreme interests. From a procedural perspective, Russia or Putin has said he's putting Russia on the same footing as the United States. I would submit this is nowhere near an extraordinary event. He hasn't made that case. What would constitute an extraordinary event? Well, a US nuclear test would. The fact that the Duma passed a law revoking that ratification is, in some respects, immaterial. When you do look at the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, it doesn't pass the test of, domestic legislation that inhibits carrying out the treaty. Is this a pivotal step onto a slippery slope, right? If we believe Putin that he would not test until the US does, then this is somewhat in our control. With one important caveat, right? There is no guarantee about Russian disinformation about operations at the Nevada test site that could pave the way for Russia making an argument that, the US has violated the treaty and therefore they are going to pull out. But more importantly, I would say along the lines of this isn't, there are not really serious implications of the de-ratification. If you worry about the impact of this action on the future of the treaty itself, I think you need to consider that the history of nuclear testing limits is not just defined by treaties. There's a strong influence of, for example, outside scientists, like the group of scientific experts that began in 1976. Obviously, all the work that the Preparatory Commission for the CTBTO has been doing on building a verification regime. The norm of not testing has significantly deepened, with the exception of North Korea since the 1990s. And the world is more transparent today. So if you've been following sort of the articles, I think they began in September of 2023 with the CNN article about activities at test sites, it's a little harder to hide things. My bottom line on this argument is that Putin is basically making up the rules as he goes along, right? He has a domestic audience for this, but it's really hard to know what he's hoping to achieve internationally, besides highlighting the US inability to follow through on its own treaty obligations, our ratification, which at the base of it calls into question somewhat the viability of the so-called rules-based order. All right, so that's the argument. It's not so serious. Now we'll play with the argument that it is serious. As Rob Floyd has mentioned, Putin has a track record of withdrawals from treaties, some of which were preceded by suspensions. So, the the ICC in November of 2016. In October of 2019, Putin revoked the protocol additional to the Geneva Convention, the Open Skies Treaty last year, suspending participation in New START this year. He even suspended bilateral tax treaties, which was a very odd act. And of course, more recently, formal withdrawal from the CFE, Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. What you need to remember there is Putin actually suspended Russia's participation in 2007, which was then followed by a suspension of active participation in 2015 before the final withdrawal. So you could look at this as this is kind of a stepping stone to a final action to withdraw. The second point in this argument is it doesn't really matter to Putin what the legal procedures are. He's simply forging ahead. So we can argue amongst ourselves how legal this particular action is. But if Russia considers itself not to be bound by the treaty, then it will not feel bound by the treaty. A third point is, and this echoes what Jean said, Russian nuclear testing, I believe, would put enormous pressure on the US to respond. A fourth point, the CTBT, for all the reasons that have been mentioned earlier, has been a really important vehicle, not just for US-Soviet relations, but also multilateral arms control, right? It was an area of cooperation when US-Soviet relations were terrible, right? We signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963. In 1974, we did the Threshold Test Ban Treaty. In 1976, we did a Peaceful Nuclear Explosions Treaty. So, it's been one area where we've actually been able to cooperate. I would also argue that if New START ends in 26 without a follow-on measure, withdrawing from the CTBT or the collapse of the CTBT would almost certainly accelerate a nuclear arms race, and this would erase progress of the last 30 years. I'm going to, I don't know which argument of those you found more compelling, but I wanted to end my remarks with a few almost questions or policy considerations. I'm happy to hear from Kasia, the U.S. continued commitment to not testing. But I think we have to question continued political support for U.S. test moratorium going forward. We had a question in the Q&A about congressional views on CTBT. There's a reason why we haven't put the CTBT back or we haven't brought it to another vote. Because we don't have the votes. But I wonder if Trump returns to office, what might happen there. The impact of Russia's de-ratification on China. Would this, I think Jean made the point very well that there may be reasons for China to test, or can we turn this into a cooperative effort? From the U.S. domestic political perspective, we have, we have a lot of support, I would think, or an incentive for functioning CTBT, which inhibits China. I know that's a big lift for the U.S. and China to work together on ratification, but it's something I've advocated for a long time, mostly in the North Korea context. And then finally, my last point is this has much bigger implications for multilateral arms control going forward. Jean made the point, the CTBT was the last treaty negotiated by the CD, but we couldn't even get it out of the CD for a vote. That process seems to be broken, and we need to come up with workable solutions, even as I do believe that China and Russia are doing a lot of work to undermine many of the institutions that did serve us for many decades. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Very interesting comments. I like the pro and con approach. So I want to invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras for the Q&A session and invite Alicia to come back. So we have some questions that we as the moderators put together, and there are quite a few popping up in the chat. I invite the audience, or sorry, not the chat, but the Q&A section. I invite the audience to continue to place questions there, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So I have the pleasure of the first question, and this is a question for Rob Floyd, but I'll also mention that we'd like to the extent possible, have a discussion here. So once Rob answers this question, if anyone else would like to contribute to it, you're welcome. Just let us know. So the first question is that the CTBTO has demonstrated its ability to detect nuclear tests and other explosions. And Russia's defense minister, as Rob mentioned, has announced plans to complete its segment of the monitoring network within its borders. And I actually didn't realize that was going to happen by the end of this year. That's pretty exciting. So in my mind, it's probable that if Russia conducts a nuclear test, it would be detected. So what's the real effect in the regime of Russia's de-ratification, or what's the effect on global security?
Yeah. Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the other speakers for your contributions. Certainly some interesting things there to contemplate. What then is the impact of the Russian Federation de-ratification on global security? That's a good question to ask. It is very clear that, to me, the Russian Federation is making the case that they feel no less obliged to act in accord with the object and purpose of the treaty than they did before they de-ratified. And then looking at their commitments to establish all stations that they're responsible for. That was on track, to be done by the end of this year. But it was very important to them to stress to me that, yes, it remains on track. Their engagement here in the CTBTO and the PrepCom is undiminished in one sense because membership is from signature. It is not from ratification. Now, some other states, maybe one that many of you are interested in, would be very, very appreciative that that is the basis of membership. Nonetheless, I'm making the case, and I made it to you earlier, as to why entry into force is absolutely required to maintain confidence in the treaty. So in all of those areas, the Russian Federation continues to be involved. We have Russian Federation staff in the CTBTO. There's no change there. The Russian Federation has continued to pay its dues, and I would expect it would continue so to do. It will be a positive step when the final 32nd station is brought online. 305 out of 321 stations are established. The US is responsible for one that is not established yet. We look forward to that one too. We are working with various states to see their segments completed, and that's something we celebrate every time that happens. So that's how I would see the context on that, Susan.
Thank you. Do you think that if, so there's the 8 states that remain to ratify in order for the treaty to come into force. Do you think that there could be a domino effect if one of the major countries were to ratify, or do you think that they all have separate reasons for not ratifying, and therefore maybe we wouldn't have that type of an effect?
Yeah, I'm still getting used to saying there are 9 states that need to ratify, not 8. I'm glad to feel uncomfortable about that. I know various people talk about the domino theory. Jean mentioned it earlier. I'm actually not an all-out believer. The reason is that I find that quite demeaning and unbelievable that if the domino theory was to apply, then we're saying basically that all the other states set their foreign policy based on the United States foreign policy. They are all proud independent states, and they would resist such a characterization strenuously, and so they should. So, each state will make the decision based on their own geostrategic calculation. And we're engaging with each of them, all 9 of them, to see how we get from where they are to where, in all of those cases, where they would ultimately want to be, and that is to see this treaty ratified and therefore entered into force. However, all of that said, it would be a powerful, powerful step if China and the United States were to agree to ratify this treaty. Sharon, you mentioned something of that idea. It is not about the US, it's about the China and the US, and now I would add the Russian Federation, that if the 3 nuclear weapon states under the NPT were to agree that they would all ratify this treaty, I believe that that would have a powerful influence on others. And so there is statesman-like leadership required from those 3 countries, to see this thing move. So I don't buy the domino theory completely, but I absolutely buy the leverage and impact of those 3 states, would be potentially huge.
Thank you very much. Jean, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I refer to the domino theory, but I want to be clear that I never subscribed to that when I was in the CTBTO, for the same reasons that Dr. Floyd just mentioned. It came up when President Obama referred to the US's renewed commitment to ratify the treaty in 2009, and shortly after that, Indonesia, who was then the 9th Annex II state, to ratify. or ratified, was the ninth state at that point that was holding out. And that gave rise, especially in the NGO community, to this idea of a domino effect. I mean, I remember, making presentations, and I still have those slides about, well, why not China first? Or, why not one of the other states? I think what we need to consider is that the United States cannot ratify this treaty given the domestic situation in the country, in the Senate. So even though I agree with Sharon and Dr. Floyd, it would be fantastic for the United States and China to do so together. It's simply not going to work. I think we need an external pressure. So I believe that countries such as China can take the leadership. I believe that even so far-fetched that a country such as India can take leadership towards signing the treaty, which would send very, very positive signals to the US and to US political leadership. And one question of your part of your question, Susan, that I do want to respond to is that I don't think that Russia's renunciation of its ratification would have any positive effect in the US congressional leadership. To the contrary, I think it would harden the hardliners' view that the US needs to keep the opportunities open to resume testing. So I think this is where my reverse domino theory comes in, is that I think it could actually have a reverse effect of those who believe that a domino effect could lead to interference.
Sharon.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here and be a little controversial. I don't believe in the domino effect, but I do believe in leadership and setting precedent. And I also subscribe, Rob, to your characterization of the current landscape, right? When you look at those 9 countries that still have not signed/ratified, we're concerned about quite a few of them, right? Iran is on that list. Israel, I can name them, you can't. Iran is on the list. Israel is on the list. North Korea. I mean, my proposal for the US and China to work on ratification of the CTBT originally had a North Korean component, right? Because we don't want North Korea to do any more nuclear testing. And so I wouldn't simply say, yes, of course, countries do, they make choices for security reasons, et cetera. But I think that given the fact that we have a ban treaty in force, right, based on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, that should give added impetus to putting the final nail in the coffin of nuclear testing for, the whole world. I mean, yes, is it a huge diplomatic lift? Yes. But I think if you chip away, and of course, this is your job, right? If you chip away at those last outlying states, it's a task that we have to continue doing. But I think in this current landscape of continued anxiety and real concern about nuclear weapons use testing, that it's even more important today.
Really great discussion. Kasia, did you have anything you wanted to add? If not, I'll shift to the next question.
Well, I suppose I'd like to be able to say that the US Congress cares one way or the other, whether China or Russia are members of the CTBT. They certainly care that they're not, but I don't imagine that having China sign the CTBT will sway the hardliners in Congress. I mean, I think if you look at the history of vote counting on the Hill, I don't know that we're even at the same number of votes that we might have had in 99. I mean, things are just so stratified right now, unfortunately. So I don't think that it would necessarily have a positive domino effect. But unfortunately, I think the domino effect usually works in the opposite direction in terms of the catastrophic things that would take place if Russia were to effectively pull out of the CTBT. I think that, you know, the larger question of what is the immediate impact, and Susan, you're probably going to jump into this next question, but if you don't mind, I'll just sort of weave it in here. What is the impact of Russia de-ratifying CTBT on perhaps the NPT or the future of arms control is really the bigger issue, as opposed to what is it going to do for people who are still not signatories to the treaty. You know, Russia has been maintaining a misinformation and disinformation campaign on all fronts for a very long time. They're very successful. You know, they're extremely active. So I think that that is something that we need to continue to press back against and make sure that it doesn't have an impact on NPT and future of arms control. As of right now, I don't think that simple de-ratification will have an impact on the NPT, although I do think that it will exacerbate or encourage the discussion in favor of the ban treaty. You know, here once again is a nuclear weapon state who's not living up to its disarmament obligations, and we should be pursuing the TPNW. So I think that might have a bigger impact than it will necessarily on the NPT. But I think it really does get to the matter of what is Putin's intent behind the de-ratification. Dr. Floyd has given me some sense of better security, that Russia is indicating that it intends to continue to meet the object and purpose of the treaty, but I think that remains to be seen, obviously, as with any time that they have either suspended or officially withdrawn from a treaty. And Sharon gave a whole list of the treaties that they have been pulling out of. I think the other thing to consider is, you know, if they don't intend to live up to the object and purpose of the treaty, then they should not be a member of that treaty. There's nothing, frankly, worse, as we have seen, than being a member of a treaty and violating that treaty. That, I think, is a harder death for the treaty than to pull out and do your activities outside of the treaty. But I don't want to get into that too much. Future of arms control, boy, I wish I had a crystal ball. That is the $100 million question. As I said in my remarks, we continue to hope that the security environment will allow us to pursue arms control. Right now, it seems very remote and far off. You know, we are prepared to come to the table without any preconditions. We would like to have these conversations. We think that arms control is an absolutely important element of deterrence. It is just as important as maintaining a stockpile. It, you know, helps you avoid miscalculation and misunderstanding and provide stability and all of those things that are absolutely required for deterrence. But I don't know whether traditional arms control is going to continue. I think that we're looking at a very different environment where we're going to have to be very smart. We're going to need the NGOs. We're going to need all of our technical experts to help us figure out, can we do arms control without verification? Can we do arms control that is not, you know, necessarily bilateral? Maybe it's more of a collection of unilateral agreements. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider. I think that we should not continue to bang our head against the wall only pursuing traditional arms control. I think we need to think broadly so that we can achieve the stability and safety that this world deserves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been really great. And all this is relevant and a great segue into our next question before we kind of kick it over to what the audience has been asking. But, you know, we talked about the domino effect of one of the 9 countries ratifying. And we were curious, Susan and I, about the potential domino effect of de-ratifying. And so I think some panelists may have touched on this a little bit. I think we wanted to dig into this a little deeper in the Q&A. But, you know, does the de-ratification put pressure on the United States Congress? And as someone in the audience asked already, you know, what are the current concerns being expressed by U.S. Congress regarding ratification? Sharon or Jean, you know, if you have any thoughts. Go ahead, John.
Well, I think I kind of addressed this in my initial remarks. You know, if there's to be a reverse domino effect, which I don't really subscribe to. I threw it out there for purposes of stimulating the discussion. But I do think this relates to Kasia's earlier comments about the future of arms control, and in fact, the future of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. You know, Dr. Floyd mentioned this very early on. You know, that the CTBT is a key element of that regime, and it has been on the target, or on the horizon for states for decades. And without a CTBT in place, and without upholding the norm against nuclear testing, it's hard to imagine that states will further reduce their nuclear arsenals. If you have a situation of nuclear testing starting, even limited testing, as Sharon pointed out, you're likely to see a renewed arms race. And so the question is, to me, is not necessarily, are we going to see more countries withdrawing from the CTBT? This is just like the question that came up when North Korea left the NPT. Well, more countries may leave the NPT. That's not really the question. I don't believe they will. The norm is firm enough. The question is, the countries that I mentioned, and the countries even outside the CTBT at the moment, such as India and Pakistan, what are the incentives for them to resume nuclear testing? There are no restrictions on them other than an international norm that is shaky at best at the moment. And so I think the impact of such nuclear testing would have a severe impact on the future of arms control. But let me just make one comment on that in line with Kasia's comment. I believe that the arms control, as we have seen it, especially when it bloomed during the 90s, that period is over. And to try and go back to that is sleepwalking. What we need to look at is resetting arms control. And that would require including the countries that have been excluded from that. Just because they're not members of the NPT and have not signed the CTBT, we can't ignore countries that are outside with nuclear weapons. And to argue that, well, we need to resume arms control with Russia without including China, without including India that is linked to China, and without including Pakistan that's linked to India, I think is not going to take us anywhere. So the idea that Kasia just mentioned kind of is this will require a series of maybe bilateral, unilateral actions that form a new type of arms control environment. But to come up with one single arms control treaty based on US-Russia collaboration, I think those days are past.
Yeah, Rob, go ahead. Or sorry, I saw the hand first from Rob.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Sharon, if I just jumped in front of you with my hand up, but this is digital terrorism, isn't it? Yeah. Do I think that there's going to be a slide of states choosing to de-ratify because the Russian Federation has done so? No, I don't. No, I don't. I certainly hope not, but I don't actually believe so. For me, the two biggest risks to the CTBT is firstly the resumption of testing by any significant possessor state. That could have huge, even existential ramifications for the CTBT. And that would be very unfortunate. And I think that it's in the interest of all states to be working very hard to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. The second major risk is if there was a broad range lack or a loss of confidence in the treaty. And this is the point I was making in my earlier comments, that the IMS, in its test and evaluation stage and delivering benefits to all of humanity, is wonderful, but it's actually not enough. And if there was more and more doubt about the credibility of states' claims that, of course, I'm doing nothing, of course, I'm doing nothing, then if they could not see the treaty enter into force and see those verification mechanisms then being able to be accessed and used, that would be a real risk to the treaty. So those are where I see the risks lying, more than will there be a range of other states that will follow Russia's direction. Yeah, thank you, Alicia.
Thank you. Sharon and then Kasha.
Yeah, just one anecdote, you know, in Googling around on this kind of reverse domino effect, I came across an article by Al Jazeera, which was trying to make the case that, you know, Russia pulling out of treaties had caused other countries to do it. And I forget, it was just one country, but, you know, if Al Jazeera can't make that article, I mean, can't make that argument, you know, despite Russia's best efforts, I think there are a lot of elements of the international order that benefit everybody. One of those things, Kasha, and here I'm going to sort of push back a little bit, you know, arms control without verification. I completely agree with Rob. You know, monitoring is monitoring, but verification is another animal. And I'm deeply disturbed by the fact that the AVC Bureau at the State Department took verification out of its name in favor of deterrence and stability, because, you know, deterrence and stability are two really very subjective qualities or characteristics. And I'm sure a lot of the participants on this call like much more hard data. But I know you asked, Alicia, about congressional views. I'm going to be totally honest and say, beats me. You know, honestly, there's going to be a group of senators who just hate arms control. And, you know, if you read Tom Cotton's letter from 2019, you'll see that, you know, if they could have complained about the font that the treaty was written in, that's what they would have done. But you know, so I think Kasha's completely correct. You know, when you do the vote count, it's not there, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that efforts still shouldn't, you know, be that we shouldn't expend a lot of effort. We should expend a lot of effort in normalizing, socializing, getting up on the hill and saying, hey, guess what? This is, you know, if this treaty doesn't work, you know, we benefit the most, the US. And this is what astounds me about the Congress, how, sorry, I worked for them for a while, ignorant they are. We're the country that conducted the most nuclear tests of everyone. Right. So if anybody has to benefit something, it's the United States. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, thanks for your views. Really appreciate the discussion so far. Kasha, go ahead.
Thanks, Sharon. You are spot on. I believe this may have changed, but I believe that there is only one nuclear physicist among all of the members of Congress right now. So there's really just a lack of understanding about what are truly the technical issues associated with CTBT. We did do a lot of work historically to try and educate members. I think we're lacking a real champion on the Republican side, like we had in Senator Lugar before his departure. Someone who can really rally that side and make them understand the benefits to the United States. I mean, just very basically, the technical argument is that we would be unable to detect low yield testing, which is why we have programs in place at the Department of Energy and NNSA to help us better to improve our detection capabilities. So I do not believe that that is a viable technical argument. And the other, of course, is what if we need to test? Well, there are provisions in the treaty that, as Dr. Floyd mentioned, that allow you to diplomatically leave the treaty. So that shouldn't be something that would prevent us from ratifying the treaty. But it is unfortunately just a political issue at this point, and the Hill is so incredibly stratified across every issue that this is, while still a priority for this administration, the understanding is that it wouldn't help our efforts to get it ratified to try and put it forward at this point. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. Susan, do you want me just to go ahead and ask the next one? We can just
Sure,
keep
go
it
ahead.
going. We're combining questions in the background and we're going to try to get through as many as we can. We recognize we only have 11 minutes left. So combining a few questions. This is for Rob. Does the CTBTO coordinate and collaborate with the IAEA? And if so, how? And are new capabilities being explored for the IMS? Is that a possibility? Is there a possibility of the CTBTO leveraging, methods and techniques that the IAEA already uses, for example?
Thank you for that question, whoever it was that asked it from the chat list with Alicia. I think it's wonderful that the IAEA and the CTBTO are both here in Vienna. The two UN nuclear-related organizations, and it makes perfect sense. The role of the CTBT is absolutely to contribute towards non-proliferation. It's also a role that contributes towards disarmament. That to have an effective ban on testing and effective monitoring system is critical if you're going to move towards disarmament. So both aspects of non-proliferation and disarmament are critical to us. But our remit is quite focused. It is on testing. And so when I look at the remit of the IAEA under the NPT, they are looking deep into all aspects of proliferation, and obviously safeguards is what is called their verification system. In that space, very important, and more power to Rafael Grossi and the rest of the crew on safeguards. In some ways, if our treaty entered into force, then our verification activities are a little later down the chain than those of the IAEA, because we would be saying, yes, there's evidence somebody has developed a device and they've tested it. So each has a part to play, and working cooperatively. We do have some technical exchanges between our staff and the IAEA staff, which is great. Regarding new technologies, it would be wonderful if it was an unconstrained world that we could just use whatever technologies would be helpful. In a pre-entry into force world, that's not a possibility. There are pathways to do that after entry into force. Again, another reason why, if we want to see every country in the world benefiting from the CTBT, and I do say it is of benefit, it is in the interest of every country to see the CTBT enter into force. This is one of them, is to be able to remain current with current technology and to keep improving. We need to see entry into force before that can happen.
Sure, go ahead, Sean.
Thanks. I just want to add a few things to what Dr. Floyd just mentioned about the relationship between the IAEA and CTBTO, and I'll be less diplomatic than the head of the CTBTO at the moment. I think that relationship can be improved vastly. I was part of the time when the CTBTO shared data with the IAEA in the aftermath of Fukushima. And that was really a good spike in the relationship, and proved to the members, by the way, mostly the same member states operating from the same missions in Vienna, that there's a lot of scope to improve the relationship. But the IAEA typically looks down at the CTBTO as the sort of little ugly duckling that represents a treaty that has not entered into force, and it should really be part of the IAEA. Right. And there was even attempts at the time to reconstruct a monitoring system to monitor earthquakes for the development of new nuclear reactors, while the CTBTO sat on the system. But I think it's important to highlight what Dr. Floyd mentioned. The IAEA, what I call is the upstream verification. Safeguards it gives the indication of a state's intent to perhaps move peaceful use activity into a military one. The CTBT, there's no intent. It detects a nuclear test, and therefore is the downstream. Once you cross that barrier, a state has announced its nuclear capability, and therefore the CTBTO's role is, in my view, equal to that of the IAEA in the non-proliferation regime. Just a quick question on new technologies, and I agree with Dr. Floyd. But I do think, I mean, there are so much work being done today, especially with the emergence of AI and other new technologies, that there are opportunities, and here I want to highlight the science and technology conferences for scientists outside the CTBTO to provide examples of on how these technologies can be used not only for non-verification purposes, but how that it can actually supplement the verification regime. Not that that would be added to the CTBTO's system at this stage, because it cannot be done in 2024. But I do think that the science and technology conferences play a very important role to highlight the supplemental technologies that could be used.
Thank you all very much. This is really a fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, we're getting towards the end of our time, and I'd like to ask one more question, which is actually a group of questions. So maybe I'll give each of you about a minute to answer it. So, and here it is. So we had questions in the chat. How can individuals play a role in influencing leaders' decisions to prevent nuclear testing? And what actions can people take to contribute to this effort from their perspective? The second question is, how does social media contribute to the dynamics of this situation? And the third is about workforce development, something that I think a lot of people are talking about these days. Many fields are experiencing a decline in availability of qualified professionals. So I'm wondering, is the CTBTO experiencing workforce shortages, the pool of qualified candidates? And how can young professionals prepare for a career with the CTBTO? So Rob, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm very delighted that I presume a young professional asked that question about how can young professionals join the CTBTO. And your comment about workforce development. Let me deal with those couple of questions first up. We are seeing a surge in the number of people that are applying for jobs with us, and that is wonderfully gratifying. Is that there are a lot of people that would like to work for us and to work, as a part of this cause and this mission. We're very, very pleased about that, and we are always looking to recruit the very best and the brightest, and particularly if they're women, and certainly young people, and particularly from underrepresented regions. We have a number of programs where we are trying to prepare younger, early career people better for application, so that, because what we're getting is people are so motivated. We're getting some really experienced people that are lobbing in for low-level jobs. And it's not fair. It's not fair. We actually want the young people to get these low-level jobs, to bring their perspective and bring their diversity to play. And so we're certainly very keen to see through our mentoring program ways, and internships, etc., ways that we can see young people develop to be really competitive when they apply for jobs and get them. And I'm delighted every time I'm able to approve the appointment of somebody that fits that kind of profile. So we're very happy with the level of interest, and long may it continue. The questions about social media and influencing leaders, etc. Social media is a wonderful tool. It allows everybody to be a publisher and get messages out like was never possible decades ago. But I would say that it's really important to think about a strategy of influence. Is just going blah doesn't actually mean it's a strategy. And I think some of the comments around, say, the senators and the Hill, that's happened in this conversation is very important. Is that you know what the problem is, But then what's the strategy of influence? And it's got to be very specific and focused and analysed as to what the key issues are and when is there an opportunity, when is it just going to provoke. And I would really welcome, and I encouraged earlier today, I was encouraging a bunch of leaders from other parts of the world. Look, next time you're in Washington, visit the Hill. Talk to some of the people on the Hill and let them know directly, you want to see this treaty enter into force. They need to hear it when these visitors, high-level people from other governments come to town. So this is one of the angles that we've identified that could help, could make a difference. So I think be targeted, be specific, have a strategy, but use your voice, please.
Thank you. Sharon?
I don't know if I can improve on what Rob just said. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you for this opportunity. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you. Tasha?
It may be trite, but if you want to influence leaders, vote. Social media, I think, as Rob said, it's a very powerful tool, but as my mother always said, consider the source. Be very cautious in what you are reading. Don't believe everything you are reading. Please don't retweet it if it's not accurate. Don't fall into someone else's misinformation campaign, but your voice is important and certainly you should use it. If you're interested in a position at the CTBTO, I encourage you to consider the national laboratories as a starting point. We have feeders from all of the universities, or many of the universities, directly into our laboratory system. You can get a great starting start your career there, and then head out into the international field. And we would always welcome you back when you're done. So a plug for the national labs. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kasha. And last but not least, John, do you have anything you'd like to contribute?
Yes, just briefly, I think, as an educator now working for an institution that prides itself of training the next generation of non-proliferation and disarmament experts, I have to echo Dr. Floyd's comments about the value and the role of youth. And youth, in my view, are not just people that are young. They are people that are even at high school. And I think that we need to look at, and the CTBTO is doing a fantastic job in this, but as NGOs and as academics, there were days before doing a negotiation of the CTBT and running up to the NPT Review and Extension Conference, where the CTBT was a primary objective, where there were marches down First Avenue, where there were newspaper articles, where there were televised interviews about the importance of establishing a test ban. We are back at that stage, and yet we don't see much of it. We don't even see much discussion in the context of the NPT. I mean, there was a question earlier. I'm willing to wage some money on it that in the next PrepCom, this issue of Russia's withdrawal will hardly surface. And so I think there needs to be a renewed emphasis, not just by foreign leaders in the United States, but what about the other countries? What about countries that are aligned with Russia, with China? They should use their influence to talk to those countries. The emphasis should not only be on the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all. This has been a fascinating discussion. The time has just zoomed by. We're a little bit over our time, so I appreciate you helping us with this webinar. Thank you to Alicia being my co-moderator, and thank you to the audience. We had over 200 people online during this discussion, so it's nice to see that there was interest in the topic. Alicia, would you like to say a few words before I turn it over to Tina to close out the webinar?
Yeah, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. Really enjoyed the discussion today. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience members did too. So thank you very much.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce Tina Hernandez, the INMM Vice President, to make some closing remarks.
I just wanted to thank you, Susan and Alicia, and thank you to all the speakers today for joining us. First of all, I just would like to thank all of the people who joined us today and all the thought-provoking questions that they asked. And we hope that this webinar piqued your interest in our organization. If you're already a member, thank you. But if you're also interested in becoming a member, please go to INMM.org to join. And if you want to become more involved in the Institute, we always welcome volunteers to help support our Institute. We will be having our 2024 annual meeting in Portland, Oregon at the Portland Marriott downtown waterfront from July 21st through July 24th. So please mark your calendars and be on the lookout. And in addition, we're also going to have another webinar in January. And the focus of this webinar is going to be to look at the women pioneers of the nuclear age. So kind of channeling the Barbenheimer phenomena from this past summer. I would also like to take time to thank our organizers for this webinar, Franny Elliott and Melanie Ryan, for doing all of the stuff that the audience did not get to see and made this webinar flawless. And I have one last request for you. If you want to stay up to date on INMM events and other things that are going on, please be sure to follow our social media platform. We just talked about the importance of social media at our handle INMMHQ, and we're both on Instagram, Twitter, as well as Facebook. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone and wish everyone a happy holiday from all of us at INMM, and thank you.